Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 21st of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Also, welcome to the visitors that we've got with us at the UK Column studios today. Well, the weather, the good news is that the sun is shining on the righteous, and that means that there's a lot of sunshine in Scotland, Perthshire to be precise. That's remarkable, Mike, isn't it? It's a bit cloudy here in Plymouth and the rest of the country, although we understand Brighton is pretty bright. So it's a nice day for a birthday.
Indeed. What can we say?
Well, it's unusual for me to agree with the Guardian headline, but this one I think captures it very nicely. The Queen and a reign of abject failure. We could disagree with one or two things in this article, particularly as it's written by somebody who's not a fan of a monarchy. But if we had the right royal family in post, perhaps the country would be very different. Well, we'd just like to remind viewers and listeners of a few things around the royal family. Of course, we have linkage to the abuse of youngsters at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. What's the significance of this? Well, of course, we warned Prince Charles, who was due... Prince Andrew, I beg your pardon. Prince Andrew, who was due to have a visit to the college. We warned him that there were serious accusations of abuse of students at the college. But despite our warning and our suggestion that maybe this is not a place that the royal family should be visiting, certainly at that time, he of course went ahead and visited the college and indeed visited the very workshop where some of the abuses took place. Bring in the brother. Well, here we are, the Daily Mail. Paedophile bishop and a cover-up by the church lasting 23 years. Scandal deepens over claims religious leaders knew clergyman was a sexual abuser of young men. And of course, the inference is that the royal family also knew. So here's the gentleman concerned, some 18 charges. Eventually, he's jailed. But reports in most of the mainstream press were indicating that surely the royal family must have known he was up to no good. Well, if that's not enough, perhaps we should just remind ourselves of Jimmy Savile and his very deep and lengthy connections with the royal family. And of course, it took the Daily Star here to say that when he was interviewed by the police, all references to the royal family were gently taken out, which is par for the course, Mike, isn't
Absolutely.
it, really? So there we are. What sort of royal family have we got in power? We think, well, I'm not quite sure how to describe them, really. Unsuitable for the job, or dodgy. Well, if you feel you'd like to, there's an excellent website where they're asking for people to post comments in the Queen's 90th birthday book. We feel she's a lady who's betrayed her nation, and certainly our feeling is that she's accepted mediatisation under the European Union, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But many people have come up with glowing compliments, I think, Mike.
Well, her grandson said that the Queen is a guiding example of what a monarch should be. Okay. King David said that she is a rock of strength for our nation. But let's just remember the coronation. Here is the image of her holding her magic wand there from prior to the coronation. And here she is at her coronation. And this is the key part of the oath that she took at her coronation. The Archbishop of Canterbury asked her, "Madam, is your Majesty willing to take the oath?" She said she is willing. And then the Archbishop said, "Will you solemnly promise to swear and govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Union of South Africa, Pakistan and Ceylon, and all of your possessions and the other territories, to any of them belonging or pertaining, according to the respective laws and customs?" And she solemnly promised to do so. And sadly, she has utterly failed to stand by the oath that she took on that day, which was an oath before the people, an oath before God. She failed and therefore has undoubtedly committed treason.
I would say so. Of course, many people say, well, of course, the trouble is that the Queen didn't know, that she was badly advised, she had all those nasty people around her. Do you think that stands as an excuse for the fact that she's failed to uphold her coronation oath?
She is employed to know. She is paid millions of pounds every year through the civil list for her to know. And that is her job. And so ultimately, if you forget about what level within society people are at, what we're seeing is people not doing their jobs, and that goes from the bottom to the top, and it absolutely applies at the top. She's not doing her job. She's looking after herself first, and she's not she's not doing her duty to the people.
We are suffering as a result.
Absolutely.
We should also probably remind people of the role of the Duchy of Lancaster and Oliver Letwin, of course, the politician at the moment who is running the Cabinet Office, is running David Cameron, is running the Conservative Party, and is widely rumoured to be running Britain. The man in charge of the royal finances. So it's an interesting little picture. But let's come back to mediatisation, and we encourage people to pop onto YouTube and watch this little video clip. It's
well, actually, they don't even have to do that.
Excellent.
It's going to be played out immediately after this programme.
There we are. And there's no licence fee either for this service, which is pretty remarkable. So this is John Galloway in a 15-minute talk that he did a few years ago, but the topic was, has the Queen accepted mediatisation? If you're not familiar with that term, it basically means given away the real power from the throne in return for being able to keep the title and all the benefits. So I've just taken a couple of stills from this little video. As Mike says, stay online after the news and you can actually watch it. So here is John giving the talk. And what sort of thing is he talking about? Well, there excellent correspondence from a retired squadron leader, Mr. Bourne. He wrote to the Queen back in October 2005. Am I right in concluding that as your father had been the embodiment of the sovereignty of the British people up to the moment of its death, that you assumed that embodiment at that moment? That, in fact, you have been the physical embodiment of the sovereignty of the British people throughout your reign, and that embodiment allows you the style and title of our Sovereign Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that you will be the embodiment of the British people until the moment of your own natural death, when it will pass to the next rightful heir to the throne. Am I also right in believing that the laws of treason are there specifically to protect you and your heirs and successors? Well, the response was that the Queen had asked the private secretary to thank Mr. Bourne for his letter and say that it had been passed to the Department for Constitutional Affairs so that this approach to Her Majesty may be known and consideration given to the points raised in the letter. Well, where did it go then? We've got the Privy Council Office to Squadron Leader Bourne on the 21st of March 2006. So that obviously rattled through the system for quite a while. As we've already explained, we can answer only questions of fact, and we cannot give an opinion on the interpretation of legal or constitutional matters. We simply have no locus to do so, and any opinion expressed by this office, or indeed any other government department or minister, would have no authority whatsoever. Interpretation of the law is a matter for the courts. I'm sorry to have to give you a reply that I know will disappoint you, as we have already informed you. Further correspondence on this matter will only be acknowledged. However, if we just add this little bit, the Office for Constitutional Affairs was later to say that Her Majesty's powers had evolved. What do you make of that, Mike? What might that evolving be?
Mediatisation.
Mediatisation, by which the Queen had given away her sovereign rights and powers in order to keep her title under control of the European Union.
And her salary, of course.
And the salary and the billions, if not trillions, stashed away in the bank. Well, the European Union therefore takes control of the British monarch. What sort of European Union are we dealing with? Well, the Express, I think, gets the headline: EU democracy dead. EU ignores Dutch referendum to push through Ukraine deal. So Alex Thompson was talking a little bit about this yesterday, and what has happened is the EU has simply trampled over the Dutch, who didn't want to push through the Ukraine deal. The EU says it has to happen. And what does the Express say? The latest development proves the EU has no respect for democracy, critics said, adding it cannot ever be reformed because unelected bureaucrats have contempt for European citizens and their representatives. Well, that sounds pretty good to me. And Mr. Juncker admitted that voters all over Europe have lost faith in the EU because of its meddling in their lives. In an astonishing confession of failure, he said, "We are no longer respected in our countries when we emphasise the need to give priority to the EU." Encourage people to have a look at this article, because it seemed to me there was a nice little bit of nudging, because it ends by saying British voters will choose whether or not we leave the EU on June the 23rd, with polls showing the Remain and Leave camps are currently neck and neck. And I just wondered where the evidence for that little nudge was, that it's very, very close. Don't worry that the EU is ruling your lives. It's all neck and neck. Well, the reality, and it's very easy to remember, is of course that the EU has the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. And that dictatorship is now ruling the royal family, apparently, Mike.
Apparently, yes.
Happy birthday, Your Majesty.
Now, yesterday we mentioned this document, Democracy Matters, Lessons from the 2015 Citizens' Assemblies on English Devolution. And of course, I missed one very important point, which is why I'm bringing this up again today. So just to remind you, this was a report into two People's Assemblies, pilot citizens' assemblies, which took place in the autumn last year. This was Assembly North in Sheffield and Assembly South in Southampton. And these were designed to bring the public, they said, into discussions about how devolution happens in the country. This is all about constitutional change. It's all about the breakup of the country. Now, the point that I didn't mention yesterday was that at the launch of this report, and this report is, of course, is going to launch a whole bunch more of these citizens' assemblies in the coming months. This launch was celebrated, apparently, with a panel discussion. And all the people supporting this included Dominic Grieve from the Conservative Party, Graham Allen from the Labour Party. Now, Graham Allen is in charge of the Constitutional Reform Committee. He is basically running the Constitutional Reform agenda at the moment. He's a Labour man. Tom Shepherd from the SNP, Jonathan Edwards from Plaid Cymru, Caroline Lucas from the Green Party, Lord Tyler from the Liberal Democrats, and Suzanne Evans from UKIP. Now, we've been getting a bit of criticism for criticising UKIP in the last couple of days.
Not UKIP, Nigel Farage, to be precise.
Absolutely. But again, we have now, I appreciate that Suzanne Evans is currently suspended from UKIP. However, she is one of Nigel Farage's darlings, nonetheless. And she was there supporting this. So on one hand, they are, the leadership we're talking about here are proposing that we leave the EU, but on the other hand, they are quite happy to support what is EU policy. This devolution, this breaking up of the country into city regions and into sort of rural regions. This is EU policy which is being pushed through, and I find it a little surprising that somebody who has very close links to the senior leadership of UKIP would be promoting that.
Quite a few questions to be asked, Mike. But we understand people are sensitive on these matters, but we need to get the truth out about who is doing what and why.
Yes.
Breakup of Britain, and of course the royal family saying nothing. But more good news on the birthday front.
On the birthday front, absolutely, yeah. Because Queen Julia Middleton, this is 58 today, so we've got to say happy birthday to her. Now, if anybody doesn't know Julia Middleton, when she's not wearing a fleece with holes in the sleeves, is the Chief Executive of Common Purpose. Is she still Chief Executive? Chairman? these days.
Driving common purpose, cultural intelligence.
Absolutely.
Presumably that's what's in the bag, lots of cultural intelligence.
Lots of cultural intelligence. So happy birthday to Julia. Why are we mentioning this? Well, this evening, so this is 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so that'll be 5 p.m. UK time, she's taking part in a Twitter chat. And I thought maybe people would like to offer their thoughts and
condolences
on her birthday. Yes. So the hashtag for that is Amex Leads, because this is American Express Leadership Program, the Leadership Academy rather, and so she will be taking part in this discussion. People may want to join in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's good to see the financial industry supporting cultural intelligence.
Absolutely. The American Express right at the forefront of the global leadership campaign. And of course, also at the forefront of or at least one of the functions of the global leadership campaign is press regulation. And we've been talking about this for a number of years. But the Mail today publishing a clarification, a correction. Now, the background to this, just to give a bit of background, is John Whittingdale, sorry, and his his admitted affair with a sex worker, a dominatrix. And what happened was that the Hacked Off and the Leveson campaigners that are still out there were claiming that the mainstream press was conspiring to hide the story because Whittingdale has responsibility for press regulation. And what happened then was that there was an article published entitled "The Real Whittingdale Scandal: Cover-Up of the Press," and that was published in the magazine Byline. So the Mail had made an allegation that Hacked Off had provided money to that organisation, Byline, and that therefore Byline was biased in the reporting. Well, the Mail has clarified by saying that articles on April the 14th and 15th about the John Whittingdale political storm said that online magazine Byline had received money from campaign group Hacked Off. We are happy to clarify that while Hacked Off directors have helped to fund articles there, including one of the key articles about the Whittingdale story, and while Hacked Off has previously funded Byline advisor and writer Peter Jukes, Hacked Off has not provided direct funding for the site. Now, Hacked Off was tweeting this out as being some massive retraction on behalf of the Mail. In fact, it's really splitting hairs, isn't it? If you're funding specific articles and funding specific individuals,
yeah,
it's splitting hairs. It's a correction, and it should have been done. But really, for Hacked Off to suggest that they can take the moral high ground here is a bit disingenuous.
Well, of course, they're gunning for the Daily Mail, Mike, because they've never forgotten the 11 pages which the Daily Mail produced exposing common purpose at just the right time, because, of course, it destabilised the Leveson inquiry. So let's come back to Happy Julia. We just thought we'd bring up a quote from her in this little common purpose brochure. Here it is. We should be able to bring it up on screen. And we've just highlighted a bit of it. It says, wherever common purpose operates, you will find leaders doing unusual things, taking responsibility for problems other than their own. That's a remarkable statement, isn't
Absolutely.
it? That we're now going to have people in the civil service, instead of getting on with their own job, are starting to take over other people's jobs that they got no right to do. So at work in the community, connecting efforts, recognising consequences, asking difficult questions, and gathering disparate teams, these leaders are able to build sufficient trust so that people actually change things. It doesn't have to be for the better, you just change it. Well, it goes on, and I think it's important to read what this lady says. The unusual part is when they become almost limitless as leaders. So these people become, they gain a mindset where they can do anything. They may be a police officer, that doesn't matter. They can go into the local hospital, presumably. Their leadership is limitless. This is dangerous language. And if we go just across the page, as it were there, common purpose graduates will be lighting small fires to create change in their organisations. And this, of course, is what we're seeing across the country break down, particularly in the civil service, where we're seeing crazy decisions, a lack of common sense, and people literally operating outside their authority. So well done, Julia. Your team are doing a very good job, and perhaps we ought to say they're doing a particularly good job in the NHS. This is UK column article, the NHS towards 1 million change agents. And we're saying here that, or the article was saying here, that the most damaging failings have been illustrated following the 31-month public inquiry into unnecessary deaths at the Mid Staffordshire NHS Trust. Why are we interested in that? Well, because if we have a look at this, we've got a chairman appointed, 4 assessors specifically chosen for their experience and knowledge in key areas of interest to the inquiry. Remember, we're talking about the deaths of individuals in the NHS, and this is one of the key gentlemen, Sir Cyril Chandler, just happens to be a Media Standards Trust board member and a great friend of Common Purpose. So we're in safe hands here, Mike. These Common Purpose people, clearly the NHS is getting better under their leadership, and if there's a problem with people dying, you can use Common Purpose to get in there and what, help cover up?
Possibly.
Possibly. So this is another part of the article here. So we're talking about the penetration of Common Purpose into the NHS, and key bits here: an innovative leadership development program is helping managers connect with people they would not ordinarily meet by bringing together diverse groups of people from the private, public and non-profit sectors for a unique learning experience. So you're a senior manager in the NHS, your hospital is falling apart. What does Common Purpose do? You need to go and meet some different people with no experience of the NHS. We've warned about this, and we just remind people that if you go to the UK column site and put in Common Purpose, article after article after article comes up, pages of it. I'm sure there's something to interest most people. Is it our imagination what's going on in the NHS? Well, here's a Guardian article where an anonymous writer says that the NHS bullying was so bad they wanted to kill themselves, but in any case they were forced out of their job. So this is abuse within the NHS, perpetrated by an individual, but also covered up by NHS management. And who is training the NHS management? Well, none other than Common Purpose.
Right, employment. Now, I'd meant to cover this yesterday, but we ran out of time, so I just want to mention this today. And I wasn't really going to say too much about it, other than if you read the first paragraph of the Office for National Statistics press release here on the unemployment situation up until the 3 months to February 2016, it says between September and November 2015, there were and the 3 months to February 2016, the number of people in work and the number of unemployed people increased. So the number of people in work increased, the number of unemployed people increased. Okay, but the number of people not working and not seeking or available for work, i.e., economically inactive, fell. So, looking at the statistics and so on, what I believe is going on here is that this is people that have been kicked off the getting disability benefits and so on, have been assessed by ATOS, so they're no longer economically inactive, because economically inactive people are people that aren't actively seeking work within the most recent 4-week period. So somebody that's on a long-term disability benefit would be considered economically inactive. So that number has fallen, but both the number of employed and unemployed people has risen. Those economically inactive people have been pushed from one statistic into another, and that's basically all that's happened.
Fiddling the books is what we're talking about.
Well, no, it's actually I mean, the ONS isn't fiddling the books. It's the government that's removing money from people, and therefore the ONS has moved them from one place to another. Yeah. So this is the graph showing economically. Now it looks a lot. The peaks and the troughs look a lot more serious than they are, because obviously that graph only runs from sort of 21% to 26%. So it's not quite as extreme in the y-axis as it looks, but nonetheless, we see that during the Thatcher government, we had lots of people being removed from the economically inactive category, and that seems to have happened pretty much at the same rate since 2010.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear what's going on there, isn't it?
Well, clearly the country's improving. There's more work. People are happier. The NHS is performing better. Less potholes in the road. It's all good news.
Absolutely.
And it's the day of birthdays.
It is. So, Saudi Arabia now Saudi Arabia PR firm accused of helping Saudi Arabia whitewash its human rights record, according to The Independent here, and this is Publicis Group. The French media conglomerate, as The Independent says, who owns UK brands such as Saatchi and Saatchi, and they had been basically promoting what a great country Saudi Arabia is until they were. It was pointed out to them that perhaps this wasn't the greatest thing for them to be doing. This was pointed out to them by the human rights group Reprieve, and so the next thing was the section about Saudi Arabia disappeared from the websites. So clearly people are
getting squeamish
about Saudi Arabia at the moment. But anyway, on Tuesday, on Tuesday we had Vanessa Beeley on. We were talking about Yemen and Saudi Arabia's activities in Yemen, and we showed a couple of images. Sorry about this, of what's going on as a result of Saudi activities in Yemen. Children with limbs blown off, probably as a result of stepping on what was left from a cluster bomb, and children with their, with napalm,
burns.
Absolutely horrendous burns, and these children eventually died, sadly. Well, today the Foreign Office has published the Human Rights and Democracy Report. This is the 2015 Foreign and Commonwealth Office report, and you would imagine that Saudi Arabia must appear in this. They must discuss Saudi Arabia in this, because Saudi Arabia clearly. People are concerned about their human rights record.
Well, if I remember rightly, Mike, Saudi Arabia was made chair of the Human Rights Committee, or one of the committees.
Was recommended by the UK for them to join the United Nations in that capacity. Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just read out a couple of quotes. That we also remain concerned about the inability of women to participate fully in society in Saudi Arabia, where the guardianship system remains in place and segregation presents many challenges, including political life. And the other mention of Saudi Arabia in this document, it's quite a long document, is 3 other countries, Iran, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, were responsible for 89% of all recorded executions in 2015. So no mention of Yemen. And that is the totality of the mention of Saudi Arabia. So the word Saudi appears twice in the entire document, and while they do mention that they do include Saudi Arabia as being responsible for recorded executions, that's the last we hear about it. They then go on to talk about Iran and Pakistan. So you have to wonder what is going on here. Clearly, Saudi Arabia very deeply in bed with the Foreign Office, and perhaps this gives us a clue as well, because here we go with NATO welcoming closer ties with the Gulf Cooperation Council. And who are the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council? Well, we've got Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. This is NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg welcoming the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani. He is Bahraini, but nonetheless, it's interesting that they say here, NATO places high importance in building cooperation with Gulf states. The alliance has already developed political dialogue and practical cooperation with 4 out of 6 Gulf Cooperation Council members, and that's Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar and UAE, although the Alliance's Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, through the Alliance's Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, which was launched in 2004. So even here, even though Saudi is absolutely a key member of this group, they're kind of forgetting to mention them these days. So they're clearly recognizing that there's a bit of bad publicity coming out about Saudi, but we just prefer not to mention it.
Bit of airbrushing.
Yeah, a bit of airbrushing going on.
Is all that's necessary.
And in the meantime, staying with NATO, because here we've got Jens Stoltenberg once again. This time he's making his doorstep statement on the way out of the meeting with the NATO Russia Council. This is the first time the NATO Russia Council has met for quite some time, but it didn't seem to be too productive. And Stoltenberg said that it was a frank and serious discussion but that NATO allies and Russia hold very different views. And Russia's ambassador to NATO said that there were no positive outcomes from this. There were statements made, he said, to improve the machinery of these bilateral agreements, but there was no interest on the US side. And today we said very clearly that we are prepared to engage with those countries who want to have sharper bilateral cooperation. So that's really it.
They're not speaking to each other, basically.
It's a good thing that the meeting happened, but basically they're not speaking to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, of course, wars are good for producing wounded children. They're also good for producing children. And we're going to say thank you very much to Veterans News Now for this article, Unaccompanied Child Refugees to be Dispersed Across UK. National Dispersal Scheme for Unaccompanied Child Asylum Seekers. That's an interesting expression, isn't it, in Britain, is to get underway in July. You're a 6-year-old and you're going to go and claim asylum. So what are we going to do with these children? We're going to disperse them across Britain amongst the very social services that, of course, are abusing our own children and stealing children's families. So this is the man who's putting it forward, James Brockenshire, the Immigration Minister, and his intention is that the National Dispersal Scheme should be voluntary and the statutory arrangements provide underpinning if those arrangements do not operate as we, the Local Government Association and the Association of Directors of Children's Services anticipate. So it's just a loose agreement. We're going to spread a few children. So this is the aim. These children are going to disappear. It's obvious to see what's going to happen. They're dispersed across the country. There's no formal arrangement. This is all done on an old boy's nod and a wink. And these children are then going to disappear. It's pretty unpleasant stuff, Mike.
Let's remember that it was Tim Farron, leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, that absolutely pushed for this. This was his initiative. And I would really be keen for people to keep the pressure on that man, because when he was asked, what is he going to do to make sure that these children do not disappear into the system, do not end up being trafficked, do not end up becoming sex slaves, he had no response for anybody that has asked him so far. People need to be asking questions of these people.
They do, and you can use your new UK column pens to send off those excellent letters asking the embarrassing questions. But let's just reinforce it. Here is the man. What have we got here? We've got a Syrian child stealing ring being set up. And of course, the truth of the matter at the moment is that British social services and support agencies are clearly riddled with abusers and abuse. But we're going to take those poor Syrian children and disperse them within this system. It's an outrage, Mike.
Absolutely. Another outrage. We're full of outrage today. Here we've got George Osborne. This is a great article in the Mirror. He's agreeing to exempt MPs from anti-money laundering checks.
Good.
Under pressure from a Tory backbencher. So who are we talking about? Well, this is a Tory MP, Charles Walker. And who was saying that MPs and their families being treated like African despots, because what goes on is that because MPs may be at risk from coming under pressure from criminals to launder money through their bank accounts, that they have extra, they are on a watch list effectively, and they have extra hoops to jump through whenever they want to do any banking. So Osborne now has decided he agrees. He's saying that banks could go too far and their response could be disproportionate. And so he will now move to exclude MPs from the watch list in the forthcoming Bank of England bill. And I just want to remind everybody of the attitude that we get from these people with regard to government snooping and the Snoopers Charter, which is if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. So, the hypocrisy here is tangible.
Of course. And we'll leave it there because what else can you say?
Yeah.
Hypocrisy, unbelievable hypocrisy.
And The Guardian reporting that UK spy agencies have collected Bulk personal data from the 1990s files show, well, of course we knew this already. This is a nudge, really. What they're saying is disclosure of internal MI5, MI6 and GCHQ documents reveals the agency's growing reliance on amassing data as a prime source of intelligence, even as they concede that such intrusive practices can invade the privacy of individuals. And they're claiming that this was all done beginning in 1998 under powers granted by Section 94 of the 1984 Telecommunications Act. Well, there may be some debate about that, but nonetheless, this is really a nudge to suggest that this has been going on for so long. We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
Let's just get on with the Snoopers Charter and not really worry too much.
Yeah, because there is no problem, except that I find this wonderful. Here is Russia Today. It's taken the Russians to warn us that we are actually walking into the conservative Stasi state. And their comment is, Britain is sleepwalking into an Orwellian surveillance state with most of its citizens unaware or disinterested in the far-reaching implication of the government's investigatory powers bill, a new survey suggests. Well, absolutely right. And of course, we need to bring Theresa May back centre screen because this is the extremely dangerous woman who is putting this network together. And of course, at the end of it, we are going to be living in a state spied upon like no other state in the world. Quite remarkable. Britain 2016, not a peep from Her Majesty, of course. She's too busy celebrating. But the Russians warning the British public that you need to wake up because something very nasty is happening. What a fascinating world we live in. And the Mirror article that I just brought up on the Russia Today one there needs a little bit of looking at because it seemed to me to have a nice little nudge in it. So it says 10 reasons you should be worried, but in fact when you read through the reasons, some of them are not real reasons at all. But have a look at this bit here. Reason 1, it gives the police and spies the power to see what websites you've been looking at without a warrant. So they then give an example at the top, and there's some websites, and if I put this second bit in, you'll see that suddenly they get an extra little piece of information on the end of those web addresses. So this is apparently the bit we should be paying attention to. But of course, if you look at the real nudge, what you've got is the characteristics of a very disturbed person because they're visiting pornography sites, they're visiting Samaritans and the NHS. Oh, and they just happen to be looking at guns at the same time. So the nudge is that, well, of course, this is a dangerous person who should be the target of surveillance in the first place. I think this is a little bit of psychological manipulation by the Mirror. You should be worried. No, you shouldn't really be worried because all we're doing is protecting you from somebody who's suicidal and going to run amok with guns.
Do you think the Mirror, a Mirror journalist actually wrote that article, or was it handed to them?
I would say it was handed to them, Mike. I mean, you know, why waste time investigating something when the government just tells you what they want you to write? Well, if you're not convinced something's wrong, thank you to Alex Thompson, who produced an interesting piece of art. And here it is. He spotted this in Ghent railway station, and he just thought there was something particularly unpleasant about this piece of artwork. We've been talking about the rise of weird, dark, depressing art in UK. And of course, what many people are telling us is exactly the same sort of twisted art is also appearing in European countries. One of the comments was that it's almost looking like something out of Harry Potter. And for those of you who are fans of Harry Potter, I think it's time you started to look a little bit deeper into what Harry Potter is really about and what it represents, which on basic level is witchcraft. Well, there we are. From birthdays to witchcraft, it's been an interesting news, and it's taken the Russians, as we say, to warn us that we should be now very suspicious of the motives of our own government. We're not making this up. Of course, the evidence is all in front of us. It just needs the pieces to be put together. Thank you very much for joining us today. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, and we hope to have David Scott with us, who's overseas. If he's able to join us, it will be a fascinating programme. We will see what happens. If you like what we're doing, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your help. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.